There's lots of unpredictability, and we have so many flashpoints. We have so many irresponsible leaders in the United States. We have so many accidents waiting to happen. We have the U.S. and U.K., which is also an unbelievably irresponsible government that is essentially launching missiles into Russia, which you can't imagine a more clear provocation. When Ukraine pushes the button, everybody understands that it's U.S. weapon systems, U.S. intelligence, U.S. tracking, U.S. personnel, in fact, enabling those missile attacks. So how can one rule out anything in this kind of context?
When nuclear powers are involved, the concept of manageable risk simply doesn't exist. History has shown us, from the Cuban Missile Crisis to the close calls during the Cold War, that one misstep, one miscommunication can push the world into irreversible disaster. What worries me now is how casually some leaders treat this reality, almost as if they've forgotten the lessons our parents and grandparents lived through. Strong leadership isn't measured by how aggressively you push back. It's measured by the discipline to prevent a conflict before it becomes inevitable.
You have a president of the United States with an attention span of 15 minutes who makes threats and ultimatums to other countries, who is complicit in a genocide that is ongoing in Gaza. It's not a pretty picture. It's quite a dangerous picture. What has kept us out of war is the prudence of China and of Russia, actually, because Russia has not retaliated even when clearly the Western security agencies supported Ukraine.
Russia's restraint here is telling. In moments like this, the choice not to escalate is as important, if not more, than the choice to respond. It's a reminder that in high-stakes conflicts, avoiding the next move can sometimes be the most strategic move of all. But restraint can't be relied on forever. If pressure keeps building, eventually even the most patient actor will feel compelled to act.
For example, to attack a part of Russia's nuclear triad just a few weeks ago. Well, this is such an unbelievably reckless kind of action that the West takes. But the Russian response was not to escalate that further. What's missing in all of this, I have to say, is true diplomacy. True diplomacy is not that the United States dictates, you must have an unconditional ceasefire in 10 days. That's not diplomacy. True diplomacy is you sit, you discuss, you negotiate, you listen to the other side, you take into account the concerns of the other side, you find a mutual accommodation. One of the things of the Ukraine war, for example, is the Americans demand an immediate ceasefire, unconditional. The Russians say, well, there are root causes of this war, notably NATO enlargement, the coup that the U.S. Helped to lead in February 2014 that brought this regime to power in Ukraine, and so forth. The United States doesn't want to discuss any of those root causes. That means no diplomacy.
Diplomacy isn't about issuing ultimatums, it's about building trust in small, deliberate steps. When one side refuses to even acknowledge the other's grievances, the talks are doomed before they begin. And without genuine dialogue, conflicts don't end. They simply go quiet for a while before flaring up again, often in ways that are even harder to contain. History's full of examples where peace was lost, not because it was impossible, but because it was never truly attempted.
The reason for the UN is stronger than ever. The effectiveness of the UN is very low right now. And understand that I work at and with and for the UN, and I say this with great sadness that we need the UN more than ever, but it is not effective. And the reason it's not effective is the United States is in open war with the UN. The U.S. is the country in the world by objective criteria that is least aligned with the UN Charter. I do a study each year measuring each government's alignment with the UN Charter, General Assembly, and UN Security Council, UN agencies, and the US comes out last of the 193 countries. So the country that essentially invented the UN, because this was the brainchild of our greatest president, Franklin Roosevelt, is now in open battle with the UN, open battle on every front. It uses its veto in the Security Council to stop war, to prevent the emergence of peace, for example, in the Middle East, or to implement the two-state solution. It walks out of the Paris Climate Agreement. It doesn't pay its dues to the UN. It leaves UN organizations like UNESCO and World Health Organization. It doesn't sign UN treaties. So all of this has weakened the UN. The UN needs a UN 2.0. In other words, don't be cynical and give up on the UN. Understand its vital role in the world and strengthen the UN.
If the UN can't act decisively in moments of crisis, it risks becoming little more than a symbolic gathering. Its original purpose was to prevent another global catastrophe, to give nations a place to settle disputes without resorting to war. But when that system is undermined or ignored, it leaves a vacuum, one that powerful states will gladly fill on their own terms. And once that happens, the idea of a shared set of rules starts to crumble.
What is the UN 2.0, and do you think what happened to the League of Nations will happen to the UN now?
The League of Nations is, of course, the dire possibility that we face. What happened with the League of Nations is that it was founded in 1921, and then when the crises of the 1930s came, it proved inactive and incapable of maintaining the peace.
The fall of the League of Nations is more than just a historical footnote. It's a stark warning. When an international body loses credibility, its collapse can accelerate global instability. In the 1930s, that vacuum led to a chain of events that engulfed the entire world in war. The UN today faces a similar test, and if it fails, rebuilding something better will take far longer and cost far more than simply fixing what we have now.
And now we have the UN in the face of an ongoing war in Ukraine, in face of the catastrophe in Gaza, in face of the growing environmental crises in which the UN treaties play a central role. And the UN as an organization cannot respond adequately.
A veto is meant to be a safeguard against rash decisions, but when it's used to block nearly every meaningful action, it becomes a tool for paralysis. That kind of political gridlock sends a dangerous message, that the rules only apply when it suits the most powerful. And when smaller nations see that, it erodes faith in the entire system, making them less likely to cooperate when it's needed most.
Partly because the U.S. Puts vetoes in place, partly because the UN doesn't have a dedicated budget that is adequate to the task, and the United States and other countries don't pay even the tiny amounts that they're due under the core UN budget. UN Security Council resolutions come and go without being enforced. So all of this means that we need an upgraded UN system. The UN needs its own adequate financing. I have recommended that taxes be put on international shipping, on international aviation, on international financial transactions, on emissions of carbon dioxide, on other tax bases that should provide directly the revenues that one needs for global governance. I have advocated repeatedly for the UN Security Council to be upgraded, of course, for the whole veto process to be overhauled so that one country cannot willfully oppose the overwhelming consensus of the global community, which is exactly what the United States is doing today, for example, in the question of Israel's genocide in Gaza. There are many other reforms that have been recommended for the UN, including also even a UN parliament alongside the UN General Assembly. In other words, making the UN bicameral, two chambers, one that is one country, one vote, and one that is more representative of population in a kind of global parliament. I think this is a very good idea, actually.
And do you think that will, and do you think, sorry, do you think that will help stabilize world governance after the reforms you suggested?
The most basic point is that we have moved from a bipolar Cold War to a self-proclaimed unipolar U.S. world to a truly multipolar world. That's the world that we're in right now. But we don't have the multilateralism. We don't have the ethics, the spirit, the diplomacy, or the UN institutional mechanisms for a safe and fair and law-based multipolarity. So the world's different now, 80 years after the end of World War II. We can see why the UN is essential and also why it's not working. The United States clings to its self-declared hegemony or primacy at great risk to the whole world. So when you ask, will we get to something new? We will when the need for it is clear to everybody and when the U.S. opposition finally wanes, and it will wane for two reasons. One is that the rest of the world will finally say to the United States, you don't run the show. This is basic. It's what President Lula said recently, said, we don't need an emperor, referring to President Trump's demands on Brazil and on other places in the world. And second, when the American public opinion, which supports the UN and wants an end to the wars, finally regains some political power, because in the U.S., public opinion plays almost no role right now. This is a government by decree ruled by the military-industrial complex, irrespective of the will of the American people who want peace, who want mutual accommodation, who don't want the wars in the Middle East or Ukraine or in East Asia, but their voice doesn't register right now. So we can get to a multipolar world if the BRICS and other countries say yes. Actually, I should be more precise. We can get to a law-based multilateral world. We already are in a multipolar world, but we can get to a multilateral world with an effective UN charter if the BRICS, the African Union, ASEAN, other countries in the world say we do not want an emperor.
That sentiment has been growing louder across continents. The world is moving toward a multipolar order, but there's a fine line between balance and fragmentation. Without agreed rules and trust between powers, multipolarity could simply turn into a patchwork of rival blocs, each guarding its own turf. The real challenge is building a system where influence is shared without devolving into endless competition.
We do not take demands from any one country. We want to operate by the international rule of law. And if at the same time we can regain some measure of accountability of the U.S. military-industrial complex.
We already live in a multipolar world. What we lack is the structure to manage it fairly. That means honest diplomacy that addresses root causes, a commitment to the international rule of law, and leaders willing to put stability ahead of political theater. Without those elements, the global stage will keep drifting toward instability. And once that instability reaches a tipping point, history shows us it doesn't stay contained. It spreads, touching every nation, whether they're ready for it or not.